What's up, family, and welcome back to my channel. Now, before I even begin, I do need to say that the summer is in full effect in Alabama, so you might hear my kids being a little rowdy outside. That's just the way things go. But I did want to jump into this conversation with you all if you have a little bit of time. A few weeks ago, I did a short on this subject, which was about something that I actually wrestled with more so as a Christian than I do now. But I thought it would be some interesting conversation. So we're going to talk about it together. Now, before we do, you already know the routine. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, consider volunteering either through YouTube, Patreon, or through our Discord, and check out our merch. We have dope merch. Yep, I'm going to say it every time. Okay, so this conversation started when I was just kind of looking back over my own life. I've made it no secret that I was more Pentecostal. I was on the charismatic branches. My family, my father's side of the family, were American Methodist Episcopalians. I don't know if they ever say Episcopalians, but they're AME. They were AME, and my mother's side of the family were Baptist. Neither one of those, I was not interested in their version of Christianity. Their version of Christianity to me looked like mythology, sounded like mythology, and really just looked like people coming to church to keep old traditions alive, which was something that would have never appealed to me. Which is why I always find it funny when some people say, "Oh yeah, well, you didn't really find God because you were Pentecostal and you didn't find the real truth." See, the honest thing is the real truth was already bullshit to me. So and I'll kind of explain that a little bit at the end and kind of give some caveats to there. But this was often the idea was that the gifts of the Spirit ended during the age of the apostles. For some, it ended during the age of Jesus, and for others, it ended when the Bible was finished. And then all you got to do for those folks is ask, okay, when was that? Because now you can actually tie it down to a date, and that's when you realize how disingenuous a lot of these people are. They're making claims that they're used to making in a room where nobody asks questions, or in a room where people can be shamed for asking questions. But if you say, "Oh well, the gifts of the Spirit ended when the Bible was finished," I'd like to see that date on a historical timeline. Okay, so but this was a common defense against Pentecostals and Charismatics that they were wrong. We were wrong. The Pentecostals and the Charismatics were absolutely wrong for doing things like speaking in tongues and prophesying and claiming that God heals or claiming that God does anything, actually. But to me, to make that claim that the Spirit of God was not active, that God did nothing anymore, and that God had stopped doing something, that God used to do some things, and then all of a sudden he stops, became very problematic for me for many reasons. For number one, it destroys the credibility of a God who doesn't show favoritism. If you say that a God only gave these gifts during the times of the apostles or during the age of the apostles, then this God has a favorite age. He has an age that he looks at that says, these are the ones that I'll really give my gifts. Everybody else have to figure that shit out for themselves. That's horrible. I mean, what? That's horrible. So no, it to me, it's a God who shows favoritism. Well, how so, Darante? Because it's a God who heals for the apostles, but nobody else who signs up to do his work. So then the God has favorites. His favorite preachers are the 12 that he picked personally. And then it's like everybody else can suck it. That's not fun. That's not fun. And so but these were the arguments that I definitely heard for sure. God doesn't do these things anymore. God doesn't do any things anymore. And I get these people in my comments that says, "Hey, if you were a part of the crowd that said God doesn't do anything anymore, you wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. You'd still be over there." Well, see, you're only partly right. If I was a part of the crowd, which I was born into the crowd that believed that God doesn't do anything anymore, the result of that was me not believing in a God at all. It was after being introduced to a crowd that actually believed God did things that made me think that the crowd who believed that God didn't do anything was just being lazy. That was the way I thought about it. No, I look back on it now and I'm like, yikes. But that was honestly the way that I thought about it. A God who heals for the apostles or heals through the apostles, but no one else, is absolutely weird, and it definitely does show a God of favoritism. But not only that, it's out of alignment with the scripture itself, because then God heals through Old Testament prophets. So then you'd have to say where the gifts of the Spirit were for the Old Testament and the age of the apostles, and I promise you, you're going to have a hard time pulling that bag home. But then there's also this God who reveals himself, a God who reveals himself through the in power through the apostles, but no one else, or a God who changes how he reveals himself according to the age. How do you reconcile a God who changes not, therefore I am the Lord who changes not, a God who changes not, in whom there is no shadow of turning? Whatever the hell that means. Well, I thought I knew what it meant back then. But if a God is changing who he is according to age, from age to age, then this is a God who changes and not a God who changes not. So it's a God of favoritism, it's a God of change. But then here's also a big one that doesn't really get called out. It's also a God of neglect. Think about that. It's a God of neglect, a God who says, I'm going to give gifts to people so that those people can heal other people. But then after my favorite time period, I'm going to take that gift back so nobody else can get healed that way. Everybody else will just have to wait on medicine. To use some of the terminology that's out there, God left everybody else dependent on big pharma, you know. But I felt like, the people who made these arguments, in my opinion, back then, were truly the dishonest ones. To me, they were the deluded ones. They were the deceived ones. Now I see, hey, we were all deluded, all right? We were all deluded. But back then, I was like, yeah, those are the ones. Watch this, who have a form of godliness, but are denying the power thereof. You know what I'm saying? Because it was like the thing that got me, and you'll kind of see this, was the activity. If it was just the book itself, then I would have converted to Christianity, or I would have became a believer, if I would have confessed with my mouth and believed in my heart and all that jazz when I first read the Bible when I was 6 and 7 years old. I didn't read the Bible, and I was like, okay. Now I see why church is so boring. Trying to make this shit relevant is really hard. It wasn't until I started going to or seeing churches that were not bored, and those were typically the churches where they believed in the activity of God, that this God was active. I felt like the more reserved Christians were truly dishonest, because they would all but admit that God was just a feeling in their heart, because they were always adamant that God doesn't heal, God doesn't prophesy, God doesn't speak audibly, you know. And so it's like, well, what does God do? And so for them, it just seemed that God was a reason to believe, but they had no reason to believe in God. And it was very weird. It was just very odd to me. And I was just like, nah, I don't like that. Just to be quite honest, I was not interested in a God who couldn't be as visibly active today as the claims that existed in the Bible. So it did not make sense to me that there was a God who used to be able to deliver people from slavery, but could no longer deliver people from slavery. And of course, the charismatic and the more Pentecostals, their theology was more acceptable to the idea that God wanted to do those things, but could not find a man who would stand up and be the mediator. Because God does nothing in the earth without a man. This is some charismatic rhetoric that some of you may or may not uh, be used to. But yeah, so I wasn't interested in a God who wasn't active. And so, if honestly, if there were no Pentecostals and charismatics, I would have never been saved. I would have never been interested in God ever. And the funny thing is, I still wanted to be a preacher And I've told this story on some other channels, but neither here nor there. But the point is, as a child, I didn't identify the role of a preacher with religion. And that's so funny because I identified it with church, just not religion. Isn't that interesting? The things that children think though, but it's obviously because we're pre-indoctrination at that moment, and so we're coming to conclusions on our own without having to be led there, which often means that in many cases we don't know how to wrestle with all the information that we're being presented at that moment, so we're not going to come to the same conclusions that everybody else comes to. So as a child, there was nothing about church that was actually about God. I understood that God was used in the language, but nothing I saw in the church made me think these people believed in an actual God. It definitely just kind of seemed like a power play. And for black churches, that's exactly what it was, just to provide a little bit of sociological nuance. For the black church is that for a long period of time, it's not like this everywhere today, but for a long period of time, the black church was the only place in America that an African American man could be in a position of leadership and be respected. That's again, I don't make these statements, to say, boom, gotcha, or anything like that. I am not a child. I make these statements to just for those who may not have understood those things to have a little bit more nuance to think about. Say, oh, that's something I never thought about before. What's amazing to me is that uh, we struggle so much with academic integrity and just conversational integrity that we're always looking for something that the other person is saying is wrong, when in many cases you don't have the ability to demonstrate if the other person is wrong or not, therefore demonstrating the futility of your pursuit. So the most important thing is to hear what someone else says and just say, could that possibly true? Could that possibly be true? There is nothing more valuable than engaging in a thought experiment. And then what you do from there is, before you allow yourself to just randomly comment, actually go research it. Don't give me the, well, my two friends. I don't give a damn about your friends, like, at all. And just to give you some nuance on that, I'm not just saying that because it's colloquially fun to say. I'm saying I don't give a damn about your friends as a sociologist. As a sociologist, I don't give a damn about your friends' opinions. I prefer to stick to the data. And one thing that I do is I trust my ability to observe things and report accordingly. Now, I'm not asking you to know those things, because you have no way of knowing this. I'm just a face on a video, and that's honestly how you should treat me. You should treat me like a talking head, like somebody you do not know, somebody who you don't know what they're doing when they get off these videos. So you should only be treating me according to the words that I say, and you should not be taking any of those words, um, you know, to heart. You should be taking those words and engaging them in your own critically engaged thought experiment. That's how you learn. Don't learn just because I say something. So please don't go out and just be like, yeah, I now know that black men could only be respected in the church. You don't know that. You know that I said that. You know, don't use me as your shortcut. I have no problem being used, as a light to, give you, to show you where to look at. But please don't use me as the shortcut. I'd prefer that you get that information yourself, so that way you can be just as solid in it as I am. The only difference between you and I is I would have experience with it. But just because I have experience with it and you don't, doesn't mean you don't have the ability to experiment with getting that information. And it is possible to use a scripture in all of your get understanding. All right. So I wasn't interested in a God who wasn't active, was the big point. And so I have a lot of friends who are more reformed and things of that nature, and who are atheists now. And I'm often amazed at our different viewpoints, because I think many of them are the opposite way. That if they would have only been introduced to Pentecostal charismatic type of stuff, for them it would have been immediately bullshit alert, bullshit alert, bullshit alert. And so the reformed idea, I think, made more sense for them, because at the end of the day, now I don't think they'd use this language, but it It's an unsupernatural God. It's a natural God, you know. Um, or in the sense, it's more like God is a natural idea, naturally good idea that we should be led by, you know. But anyway, I was sold on Paul's God of demonstration and power. I wasn't interested in a God of persuasive words of man's wisdom. I wanted a God who could cause men to take up serpents and not be poisoned. A God who could cast out devils into pigs for whatever reason. You know, a God who could heal the sick, who could use men to heal the sick, you know? I mean, because obviously God could heal the sick. And here it is. See, this is why this didn't make any sense to me. It made more sense as a Pentecostal because Pentecostals had this line of thinking that whatever God's going to do on the earth, he has to do it through humans. You know, it's foolish for sure, but it was a line of rationale that they had that whatever God is going to do, God is going to do through humans, which for me pushed away the problem of suffering. So it actually gave me a more realistic understanding of suffering in the world. So why are people suffering? Because people aren't doing anything about the suffering. That's how I viewed it at that time, but it wasn't. There was an extra adjective. Why are people suffering in the world? Because Christians aren't standing up and doing what they're supposed to be doing. Which is why I do often tell people when you even when you go through just the finest and most flavorful, I guess, words in stories in scripture, when you really study Christianity for what it is, Christian nationalism is it's the most accurate portrayal of this thing ever because that is what you believe. You believe that your allegiance is to your God who is the king of all kings. Okay, what that's what I said. People think, oh, it's just the bad Christians making a name, making it look bad for the good Christians, and I'm like, no, the people that you're calling good Christians are not good Christians. If they were good Christians, they do whatever their God wants, and their God is a nationalistic asshole who wants everybody else to bow to him. Literally, bow to no other gods before me. And if you understand gods from a sociological perspective, gods are ethnocentric, which means every god is representative of a nation or a people within a nation. So when you give such a command as worship no gods before me, you're literally saying have no nations before me. I'm just anyway. But so I wasn't interested in that God. I was interested in the God of power. The God of power made more sense. It did at that time. The God of power made it more sense. This God needed humans because this God made earth for humans and therefore did not operate in the earth. Um, the language we literally used was that was illegal. It would be illegal for God to operate in the earth. The foolishness you can get away with in the charismatic church is amazing now. But either way, it was just this idea, okay, that God can do because the other ones, the AME and the Baptists, they didn't have a God who could do. They have a God who did, and they encouraged themselves off of the stories. It's the God who brought us over. It's we've come this far by faith, leaning on the everlasting. It's that type of stuff. It's not what God is going to do today. It is not what God is going to make happen today. And so I just wasn't interested in that. That's a God who's not present. That's a God that you're always having to make excuses for. Well, it turns out even the active version of the God turned out to be a God that I was consistently having to make excuses for. So, unfortunately, after 2 decades of that power, I realized that the demonstration didn't align with the definition. In the context of the charismatic churches, power was people crying. And as a child, I could, I could buy that. Oh, someone said it's something powerful's happening because somebody's crying. And even there's some emotional aspect to it, right? Emotions are powerful. And so you say, oh, that's powerful. We had a powerful service. People were crying. Power was also people falling out. Oh man, we had a powerful service, man. Pastor was laying hands on everybody. Everybody was falling out everywhere. Power was also paying somebody's bill. If somebody's bill got paid during the service, which, interestingly enough, is one of the things that do not get talked about a lot. But, there are churches who pay bills, and there are some churches who even make ceremony out of it. But people, power was paying somebody's bill. If somebody's bill got paid in church, man, what a powerful service we had. And then I also realized that power was pretending. Power was pretending to be healed. Power was pretending to be delivered. Power was pretending to understand things happening that you didn't actually understand happening. Power was pretending like a glory cloud was filling the room when there was nothing else in the room. Power was not social change. Power was not economic improvement. Power was not even community development. Power was personal testimony and experience with an intentional inattention to results. That's what power was. And so then, this is why, and maybe I said all of that to say this is why when I left the charismatic Pentecostal, I was done with all of it. The rest of it had been bullshit to me. Now that it was clear that there was no God who was active, now that it was clear that whether I believe in God or not doesn't change what that God does. If I believe this God heals, this God still doesn't heal. If I believe this God doesn't heal, it changes absolutely nothing. And so I'm like, so believing it doesn't make an impact, not believing it doesn't make an impact. This God either doesn't care or isn't real. And I just wanted to share a little bit of that with you today. Today has been incredibly busy. That's why this video is a little late. My schedule is insane. And I would love to say it's all great things. It's mostly great things, but it's also other things. It's just life. And I don't share much of my personal life here, only because I don't know y'all like that. I'm just going to be straight up honest. I don't know y'all. And I don't really look for, this is going to sound really bad, but I find sympathy useless. So I don't really tell people when I'm going through hard times unless I'm telling people who can actually help. But other than that, and I'm not saying y'all can't help. Please don't get me wrong. But some of these things y'all can send good thoughts for, but it's nothing major. Big point is it's been a incredibly busy day, and I'm going to try to get this video out to you as soon as possible. Thank you all for just the overwhelming support you provide for this channel, that you provide for myself and my wife, and just the work that we are doing our best to do and that we're committed to doing. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the alert notification bell, consider joining our community, consider volunteering for our community, and check out our merch. That's all I have for you for now. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and stay beautiful. I'll holla.